Nice to see everybody. So I guess I'll begin. My name is Akansha Vaswani, and I live right now in Cambridge, Massachusetts, but I'm from Bombay in India. And I want to welcome you all to the United States Northeast Storython, and we're covering the tri-state area actually of Vermont, New York, and Massachusetts. Um, And for this hour, we have two storytellers and one who calls herself an improviser storyteller. We also have three witnesses who will be part of our reflecting team. So let me introduce you to the crew. So first we have Juan Carlos Choco, as he's known to everyone. Maybe some of you are listening, you know Choco. He's in New York right now by way of El Salvador, and he's going to be one of our storytellers. So I just want to say a little bit about everybody here today. So Choco and I lived together the first time we both came to the United States. So he knows way more about me than I would like most people to know. Any secrets. But you know, together Choco and I painstakingly deconstructed America's cultural codes, and we unpacked concepts like business casual and self-care. Um, and you know, that time in San Diego will always be very special to me. Um, Kathleen Irving from Boston, Massachusetts, is our improviser storyteller. And actually, I met Kathleen almost a year ago through her partner at my psychology internship. At some point, you know, I declared my narrative leanings like I'm part of a cult or something. And when her partner heard this, they came up to me and said, Akansha, I love and live with one of your kind. And I met Kathleen soon after, and it was like meeting an old narrative buddy, just like meeting someone who understands your language. Um, our third storyteller tonight is a very magical creature, uh, and her name is Lauren Petrilli. Um, she is one of the most sensitive souls I know, and she can also be a very, very, very quiet person. And when she speaks, I'm usually hanging on to every word she says. Being around Lauren in our narrative pod supervision meetings, peer supervision meetings, is like watching a ear tuning into melodies that most other people don't hear. Um, it's very special. Um, and speaking of music, we have Michael Castelli from Middlebury, Vermont. Oh, sorry, Lauren is from Newburyport, Massachusetts. That's where she lives right now. Going back to Michael, Middlebury, Vermont. He's one of our witnesses. And speaking of melodies, I've happily bumped into Michael at narrative conferences in Vermont and heard him play and sing some wonderful songs. His most recent one is called Red Rock, so you should check it out on YouTube. Um, and I recently learned that he's a father of three, which he says is his secret to looking and feeling young, which is pretty incredible. Um, and uh, second witness is Jess Adams, who is from Cambridge, Massachusetts as well. So about a year ago, Jess decided to move from Southern California to the cold, cold Northeast to Boston. And she got in touch with me and she asked for recommendations about where she should live. And of course, I was a wonderful person and gave her the best advice. And now she lives less than a mile away from me. So I get to spend a lot of time with Jess. And she's become a very close friend. Um, and when I'm with Jess, I feel like I can really tune into like the little things that bring happiness, like walks in nature and smiling at random people. Nobody really does that in the Northeast, but Jess smiles at random people, and um, that's really nice. Um, and finally, we have Peggy Sachs from Cornwall, Vermont. She's also my co-host for this hour and one of our witnesses. So I met Peggy, I want to say in 2011, um, when she came to Bombay to train the mental health team at Umeed. Um, and the one thing I remember is that by the end of the day, the first day, she had us all in a circle teaching her how to dance the Garba, which is this traditional Indian dance. And I thought this woman, her energy just like turns people on. And Peggy is really someone in the narrative community who continues to show me how teaching is a collaborative process through all the work she does for reauthoring teaching. Um, so I will step back now, and I'm going to invite our storytellers. And how we're going to do this is, our storytellers will um, share their story for a few minutes each.
Ansha, can I interrupt for a sec?
Sure.
Could
Go
you
ahead.
say something about you more too? Or would
Oh,
you like
sure.
me to say something about you?
I think you should. I don't know what to
Okay.
say about me.
So when I first met Akansha, when I look back at the photos now, when we met in Bombay, you looked so young, and not that you don't now, but and then soon after, I had the honor of you asking me to help you figure out where to where might be a really good program for you to study narrative practice in the U.S. And I remember we talked, and I wrote you that reference for San Diego, and you were in San Diego, and that's where you met Choco. And now you've been in Boston doing a PhD, and it is now finished, right?
Um,
About to be defended,
mhm.
almost about to be defended. And if this was a different time, there'd be big celebrations going on before Akansha moves out to Seattle to do a postdoc. But it is a huge moment for Akansha of transition and of celebration. So we're so excited for you.
Thank you. Thank you, Peggy. All right. So I'm going to turn to our first storyteller for this hour, Lauren Petrilli.
Okay. Yeah, so while reflecting on a story to tell for today, I immediately thought about the story of my cat. So animals have been very important in my life during challenging times. My old cat, who I loved since childhood, he died 5 years ago, and I felt very sad about this. He was really special to me, and he felt like my only friend during some very lonely times. And when he died, it felt like the end of something, as he was the last of my childhood pets to pass. So it was only over this past year that I finally felt ready to make friends with a new animal, starting with a cat. I didn't want to have to choose one from a shelter. That felt too hard. I just wanted one to show up. And I trusted that a cat would show up when it was the right time for it to show up. So I waited. And then one day in March, my brother asked me if I wanted a cat. And he said that his coworker had been taking care of a stray for this past year and was looking for a home for her now. And I asked for some pictures, and when I saw her, I felt that this was the cat that I was waiting for. She has very green eyes and black and brown tiger stripes, and I said that I could take care of her. It was becoming clear that working from home was going to be a long-term thing, and I figured this was a good time to get to know her. So 1 week later, I was the official guardian of this cat. And at first I was worried because she hid under the couch for a few days, but we built trust quickly after that, and she's very affectionate and sociable. I call her Juniper because she purrs a lot. So while spending so much time together, Juniper's helped me notice and connect with aspects of myself that I feel were dormant while having no animals around of my own for many years. I had done pet sitting for a few years that helped a bit with this lost connection, but found that it's not the same as having your own pet. So I noticed in myself like feeling happier and safer and no longer so lonely, and enjoy feeling connected with another being that doesn't involve words. So knowing we live together and having her nearby helps me feel more grounded, and for the first time makes where I live feel like a home. As I continue to bond with her, she's helped me feel more relaxed in my heart and feel more free to express myself, especially within my relationship with my partner, who also loves Juniper And Juniper loves him too, and she's helped our relationship grow more branches and roots. So she rests near me for most of the day while I work, and then she cuddles next to us at night, like a warm, cuddly purr machine. In fact, she was awake with me last night while I couldn't sleep and I was listening in on the Storython. So in any relationship with person or animal, I think it's a comforting space to be in, having a knowing and sensing a presence between the both of you and an understanding that goes both ways. A quiet togetherness that can help me feel safer and more at home than any amount of talking could do. While Juniper's learning about me, I'm learning about how to respect her ways as a cat and treat her in the ways she wants to be treated so that we can live together more peacefully. I'm happy to be her guardian for the next many years, and as I make sure to keep her safe and cared for, I feel that she calms and protects my spirit and energy during this stressful time. But more importantly, I feel she protects my soul, because when I'm spending time with her, I reflect upon my ways of being in the world and ways that I treat other beings too, especially when no one else is around, especially when that being may not have any words, and especially when feeling tired or stressed. And I reflect on whether I am living and relating to others in ways that align with what I care about. And I think about what it means to care for others in the world, small beings and large beings, human or non-human. And she helps me reflect on these things and how I want to be. And she does all this by helping and inviting me to remain present with her, because that's the only space she seems to live in. And that's my story for today.
Thank you, Jen. Thank you, Lauren. Okay, I'm gonna turn it over to Choco.
Thank you. Thank you, Lauren. I'm nervous to speak. Thank you for inviting me. It's nice to be here and to share a personal story. I've been thinking about like, what is it that I'm comfortable sharing? And I'm not sure if I feel comfortable. I'm gonna talk about my grandfather and on my dad's side. And I'm sure that my dad wouldn't like this, but I'm comfortable because I don't think he's gonna listen to us anyway. I've been thinking recently, or for the last couple of years, how does, I'm from El Salvador, a very conservative, patriarchal country. And, how machismo looks there, it's pretty tough, like in many other places. And I grew up listening stories about my grandfather. There's a particular part of the country in the east side that is known for having very, like macho men, right? Really, really rigid in their views about roles. And I heard stories, for example, of my grandfather. He died the year I was born. And I heard stories, for example, about him coming drunk, really drunk at night, and pulling out his machete and trying to, just because he was so out of it, just slicing the beds where his children were supposed to be sleeping. But my grandma already knew a lot of these things. So she was prepared for these days, and my dad told me how they had to run kind of, they made a hole behind the house and they found this space to just run and not be in the bed when his dad did this. So my dad told me these stories growing up, and to me, those became, when you're a kid, sometimes, I don't know how I process things still, but I didn't think about it too much. And I think a lot of the stories, my parents told them to me so much that I kind of naturalized them. I normalized them. And I wasn't, when I say this now, I'm like, that's horrible, right? But I didn't really think about it before. And my dad wouldn't like me to be talking about this because for him, it's not a good family value to be speaking bad things about your relatives. On the other end, my mom says, but the truth is the truth. So that's another discussion. But also over the years, since I'm little, the stories were mostly told by my dad, but over the years I've met other people that were friends of the family, neighbors. Many of them came to the United States as immigrants, so I have come to meet some of them. And I keep hearing these stories, right? Like, he was very tough, he was very respected. You know, even old people that I met in his hometown speak about him as a really respected, tough man and generous, and people have so many good words for him. You know, he was a machete fighter, and that was part of the life over there at the time. There were many, you know, anyway, so my dad has always been really proud of his dad. But as a man and as someone who has caused harm me because of, you know, the way I'm raised and all of that, I'm thinking, like, what is the legacy of these stories? What is the legacy of this? How is this living in me, right? We can deconstruct so much, and I think I'm not gonna have enough life to deconstruct everything I would like to deconstruct, but at least how can I revisit these stories about how, you know, because my grandma is still alive, and she talks about him, and I listen how she talks about him, and I'm like, what is this relation? What is this dynamic? What's going on? You know, who am I to be asking these questions right now? But I just want to make sure that these intergenerational social legacies of harm, I think that I learned to not reproduce them. So I don't know how much time I have, but maybe the last thing I'm gonna say is, so after hearing these many stories about my grandfather, last month I met someone who knew him here in Long Island, in New York. And he was someone, I never met this guy, but he was close to my grandfather. And he told me something that I never heard before about him, very different. And he said that when my grandfather died, he got sick, and then he was in this like asylum, like not asylum, but a place for elder people who were sick. And this friend tells me that he approaches my grandfather and he's sick, right? And he's so pale, so thin, and everyone is used to seeing him strong, working, etc. And when he looks at him, he's like, hey, my grandfather says, hey, look, this is what machismo does to you. And he started tearing up. So I hear a story over, so I don't know, like, you know, I'm hearing the story through someone else, but to me, it's an important and powerful message, right? And I think to me, it just reinforces the value of going back and asking about the stories and what people did and how they thought about life and about all these relationships. So thank you for listening.
Thanks, Choco. I'm going to turn it over to Kathleen. And before I do, Kathleen, would it be okay with you if I shared a little bit about the conversation we had yesterday about what you want to do? Okay.
Yeah.
So one of the things we discussed in our planning meeting yesterday was that Kathleen is really interested in doing some deeper linking and connecting with her stories. So the reason I called her a storyteller improviser is that I'm not sure what she's going to do right now, but she's going to do some storytelling, improvising, linking some of the things that Lauren and Choco have been speaking about.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Thank you, Akanksha, for that introduction. Yeah, I think there are some things that are coming to mind, and I'm actually realizing that this started, I guess, marinating last night. And so there's, in what I heard Lauren kind of talking about, there's something that has, I'm feeling connected to. And so there's this, I think she said, what she was thinking about, connections that don't involve words, is something that I was holding on to. And then in Chaco's story, this concept of like legacy of stories in a family, and then also like kind of the naturalization of stories. that was having me think about this moment that I had on the porch last night, spending time with my roommate and my partner, and also listening in to the first couple of hours of the Storython. Is I found myself sitting in the way that my grandmother sits, or used to sit. She's still alive, but she's kind of bedridden, and her mind is clouded with dementia. And so, but it's like legs crossed like this, and she'd kind of always hunch over a little bit. And I think, you know, that was a way that I was like suddenly connecting and evoking her without any words, just by being in the way that she sat. And my grandmother is a pretty amazing woman. This is my paternal grandmother, and I think she's actually the person in the family that I know the most stories about. I wouldn't say that my family is a particularly kind of storytelling family. As I've gotten older, I think in being in this field, have learned to ask more questions and try to find the stories. But, you know, growing up, you know, I just knew my grandmother is blind. I knew that she got a master's degree at like 75. And I knew that my mom's German, and, you know, grew up in Germany. But I knew that my grandmother didn't speak German, something connected to her having had to leave, you know, Austria to come to the US right around World War II. And so I think it has me thinking about kind of maybe my role in my family, and the thing that I want to keep on cultivating is inviting more stories. Because I think, you know, it wasn't until, because my family was not raised in the Jewish faith. Like they'd already converted like a generation before her, so that they could be part of society in the way that they wanted to Catholicism. And so I've never really connected to that. But then I also know that I have a whole family legacy of a need to leave an entire continent because there was still that persecution. And so I guess it has me thinking about like the two stories that I heard today is making me think about more of this is some of the ways that I can show care for my family and for my elders in my family, and kind of working to keep their stories alive as they no longer have their voices. And I think that's, you know, something that is, I know a lot of families are doing right now as they lose family members to COVID. And yeah, so that's what this brought to me. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Kathleen. So now I'm going to invite Kathleen, Lauren, and Choco to just sit back and relax. And I'm going to turn to, this is kind of strange because I'm usually used to like turning physically in outside of witness stuff, but okay, I'm turning physically to Peggy, Michael, and Jess. You know, I'm wondering, as the three of you heard our storytellers, were there any particular expressions or words or phrases that caught your imagination or struck a chord for you in any way?
And we won't go in any particular order, just whoever wants to speak first.
Sure.
Well, thank you for inviting me to be a part of this, and thank you to Kathleen, Lauren, and Choco for sharing your stories. There's very limited time, so I don't mean to leave anyone out if I do, but I was struck by Lauren's story about her cat Juniper, and it was very sweet to hear about how much meaning Juniper has for Lauren, for you, Lauren. And I wonder if I were to ask Juniper some questions about what you and your partner mean to her, what some things that Juniper might tell us your impact on her.
That's a good question. I don't know if I've thought from her perspective in that way yet. That's kind of cool to think about. I might have to take some time to think about it. I like that question.
Well, I don't want to hog up the space, so I make room for others to speak as well. But I have many questions for Kathleen and Choco as well, and I hope I get the opportunity to ask them.
Michael, keep going. We got time.
Yeah, and maybe what we can do is, if we want, if Lauren, Choco, and Kathleen, if you bank some of their questions, and maybe we hear from the witnesses and then come back to you. So, because we have time to have responses to their responses.
Well, that's a new concept for me because I end up talking and talking and talking a lot. So. So, Choco, as you were telling the story of your grandfather and of your country and some of the political and social issues, and you mentioned some of them yesterday as well. I wonder, you had said, I wonder what it was like for you. Is it okay that I'm addressing Choco directly? I wonder what it was like for you to hear your grandfather's friend telling the story of your grandfather and some of his dying words of this is what machismo does to you, and how that inspired or informed your relationship, either present or absent but implicit, in your relationship with machismo as a male, a man, and your politics and your ideas.
Yep. Is this a back and forth? I'm trying to understand if, or should we wait? I can respond, but I'm not sure if I should respond later.
Ansha, do you want to speak? Yeah.
So I think maybe we hear from the witnesses and then come back to the three of you.
Cool. I'm taking notes anyway. Thank you for your question.
Maybe in keeping with outsider witness practices, I should address the reflecting team instead. What stood out for me, among many things, Kathleen, as you were telling your story, is that we share that in common. Of my family loves to tell stories, and coming into narrative practices have inspired me to, as I've gotten older and away from being a wild young teenager who didn't have time for these stories. As I get older and I have children of my own, I'm inspired to also interview elders in my family who love to tell stories. And now there's just not enough time to ask questions and hear their stories of where my family comes from, and how those journeys and travels have shaped my life, and especially how they are cathartic for me and inspiring for me as they tell their stories. Thank you.
Yeah, I am echoing Michael. Thank you, Akansha, for asking me to be here and be a part of this. And thank you, Kathleen, Lauren, and Choco for sharing. I felt like I was very moved in hearing all of your stories. I was, Lauren, with hearing about your cat, I noticed a little after your story, Akansha, your dog, come into the screen in the background, looking out the window. And it brought up that I wrote it down because I really loved it when you said, Lauren, this remaining present with her, that's the only place she seems to be in. And it just, it had me kind of wondering so many questions for your cat. Like, what's it like to be in the present all the time? And even just what just wanting to pick your cat's brain. And then it made me, when Akansha's dog came up into the screen, it was like, oh, it kind of expanded it from your cat to all beings. I think that's something that you mentioned in your story, and how this kind of reciprocity of all beings with us, and kind of that it goes both ways, which was just just really resonated, and I felt like I wanted to lean into that. It made me just start to even see relationship with beings outside of humans maybe in a more present way. So thank you. Yeah. Choco, the phrase that, I mean, there was a lot that I was, just struck me about your story. I have it made me think of my own relationship with my grandfather. And one thing that you mentioned, this idea of my dad has always been proud of his dad. It just made me think of the lineage of the men in your family, and what your relationship, how you would describe your relationship with your dad. And how that kind of intersects or doesn't intersect with your relationship with your grandfather. And this, through the lineage of stories. When you mentioned this very tough, very respected and generous, I was thinking of my grandfather and just all those different things alive at once. It was just really moving. Yeah. And Kathleen, when you did this, I similarly do that too. And I was just thinking of mannerisms between family. And when you mentioned this idea of my role in my family and cultivating more stories, I felt like I can relate. And I was wondering, like, how do you see yourself doing that? Or what, what does that entail? And when you mentioned about your grandmother getting her master's degree, and just kind of this untold treasure that we each hold, that families hold, I was really moved by that. So thank you, all of you, for sharing. Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Hmm?
Sorry. I really appreciate being in the position of holding the complexity and linking the lives between our storytellers. And there's so many ways I could say this. So this is one that really stands out to me. When Choco asked what to me is a very profound question, which is, how does one shape a cultural and familial legacy, in a respectful way? And I think some of the answers are in the description of from Lauren in how she has been inspired by the adoption process and the living and loving Juniper. And I, first of all, wanted to say, didn't COVID allegedly begin with an animal, you know, with a bat in Wuhan, China, and how important it is to be, you know, having the other stories of our animals as well, because this is a time of such complexity. As in our meeting yesterday, Michael said it's a time of guilt and gratitude. It's a time of balancing so much. So when I look for clues in how, Lauren, you began with Juniper, first of all, looking for the right timing, you know, that you knew for a while since, as you described your story, since your previous animal companion had died, you looked for the right moment and then it appeared. And I am such a believer in timing and noticing timing. You said that it took several days with her hiding under the couch. And I wonder, what exactly did you do to bring her out and to patiently shift that relationship? Because somehow I think there may be clues in that for all of us, because there is so much in your description about finding and building on dormant parts of oneself. The ways I assume you mean by that, although please correct us if I'm wrong, these are dormant parts of that you appreciate about yourself, and the bringing out of the ways of being that that calm and protect, and that can build more of a sense of a loving home. And I wonder then, bringing all of that and so much more, where, you know, to the question that I think is such a hard question to answer, that Choco asks, like, how then, what calms and protects the machismo soul? Like, what is it that, how can you connect with someone who is coming from a position that you may see very differently, and yet is also a carrier of legacy? And of course, in the US, we have leadership that is so polarizing and divisive. And it's because of communities like this that we can look more deeply into really teasing out what some of those skills are and some of that knowledge is that can help us do a both and there, you know, to show of yourself, to ground oneself, and at the same time be a respectful person in family and culture. Could say much more, but I think we're good to shift, don't you?
Yeah. I think there's you know, parts of how this is touching your own lives that you've all spoken about a little bit. And in the interest of time, I'm gonna switch back to Laura, Kathleen, and Choco. Just, you know, I've been watching the three of you and your expressions, and it's been I feel like there's a lot going on there. So, you know, I would love to hear from the three of you at this point. What have you, you know, as Kathleen said, stuff has been marinating. What's on the fire? What's cooking right now?
I can start. So I was thinking first just about Michael's question, which I think I remember was what might she say about me and Alex, and I think I think she would say like, oh, that seems like a good place to live, and these people seem to really like each other, and I really like them too, and this seems like a good warm place to nap. I feel that would be all I can think of at the moment. But then I was thinking about like what Jessica was saying as well, and like these ideas of presence, and it just had me thinking about like something I do as a therapist as well, like meeting her there too. It just further builds the relationship and kind of what can be possible when you're in that space together. You know, thinking about what Peggy was saying as well. Yes, the noticing the timing and trusting that it'll happen in the way that it needs to. At least that's a belief that I have about certain things, and you know, kind of thinking about what I did to help her come out eventually was a lot of just sort of just like not just leaving her alone, like letting her do things on her own time. Every so often a head would come out, and then I would just be there, but I'd wait for her to interact, and just kind of go at her pace, not try to rush it or force anything. Kind of keeping in mind how scary it must be for her, but I literally just kind of kidnapped her. I mean, took her away from everything she knew and brought her to this totally new place. And so kept in mind, you know, her experiences and kind of what I would want if I was in a totally new space, like just kind of give me time to figure out what's going on, and know that, find a way to help her feel safe enough, which I think was able to do slowly but surely, just by giving her space, which again is something that I feel I do a lot of as a therapist as well. Very similar skills and knowledges. Yeah, so yeah, I liked thinking about like the ways of being that calm and protect and creating a sense of a loving home. And I feel a lot of that has to do with creating space for the other being to be the way they are. Like I treat her like she's a cat, so I treat her like a cat. I treat her in the ways that it seems she would prefer to be treated, rather than how, I don't know, sometimes I might want to hang out more, but she doesn't, and I have to respect that. Yeah, so I think that would be my response to some of the reflections that came up. So thank you for those reflections.
Yeah, I was also, thank you. I was also very caught by the question of Juniper, because I have a parrot, and you know, I don't know, she speaks a lot, but anyway, so going back to the questions, Peggy, your question about how to respectfully shape or cultural or family legacies, to me, it really puts it together. I think really shows kind of the scope. And it's about, I'm thinking about like shaping. I think shaping is showing that I want to change it, right? And I think I do. But I think I would add to like understanding it, sitting with it, and trying to understand how it looks from there. And you know, when Lauren is saying meeting people where they're at, I'm trying to meet my dad where he's at, right? Where he's at in his love and admiration towards his dad, even if he did things that I think are fucked up, but also loving things. That's the complexity. And then how I think Michael asked about how was it for me to hear that story about my grandfather. He was dying, and he was dying because he didn't take care of his own body, right? He thought that's a result of not putting care as something important. And so first I never heard about him crying, and it really shocked me. I was in a family meeting, and just moved to the side and started to write it in my phone to make sure I didn't forget exactly what he said. Because I'm like, I need to really think about this. And this guy pretty much to me, this story, what showed me is that my grandfather understood at the end something about the harm that all of this did to himself and to others, because he was also sad for being a burden. That's how he felt, right? He was being a burden for the family and he couldn't provide anymore. So it's that, right? Like the quote of that we're standing on shoulders of giants. For me, I'm like, this is one of the, I don't know, maybe a shoulder or something. This lesson that it took him so many decades to learn, and it took him that to learn. That's an important, so it shocks me, but also I love your questions, all of your questions, because to me they're generative, and they are generative. It's not just about like going back to the past to bash on it, but it's more to learn from it, even if it's a past I didn't live, but it has lived in the relationships in my family. So with my brother, I have a brother, right? He's older, and we also grew up not really, I think at this point we never have said that I love you to each other. I think it was like 8 years ago that I finally took the step to say I love you to my father. He never did it, and I know he did. Like it wasn't because I didn't feel it. It was more like, let's just say it. And he cried. My dad cried. And now with my brother, he has a nephew, right? And I am now like also being just more expressive, more emotive with my brother. Because you grew up with siblings, right? You're kind of tough. You don't. And even in this culture, even more. So to me, I think a lot about my nephew and my niece, and how my relationship with my brother and the types of things that we foster in our relationship, how that can really impact my, in this case, my family. And I think that connects also to what Jess said about the lineage of men in the family, right? Like, how do I relate with it? And yeah, I think this is a life project for sure. And yeah, I really appreciate your questions. They make me think more about where to go and how to keep building.
Can reflect on everyone's responses. I think, and actually what Choco was saying about kind of standing on the shoulder of giants, and this, as I was kind of thinking through where folks' questions or reflections took me, I think, I forget who it was, but someone asked me, maybe it was just about like, how do I do that, like that role? And I think, I don't know if it's a question about how do I do that? I think what I want to hold on to is that the very, like, legacies aren't meant to keep the next generation static, right? And so if like some of what maybe I've taken from like the not having these like really built up rich stories handed to me, right? Like doesn't mean that that's how I have to continue to participate. And it is actually having me think about all the little like kind of like moments within my family. I can think about being my sister, we spent time in abroad, and then my grandparents, my mom's whole family's in Germany. This is the other side, but having grandparents there who I also couldn't talk to that much because my German was not that great growing up. And my sister talking about sitting down with my opa, my grandfather, and going through all of his pictures. He was a prolific photographer of family memories and things like that. And so kind of holding on to that. And I think my sister is listening. So hi, Belinda. Thank you for that. And then also one of my aunts, she scanned this is my dad's sister, all of my grandma's like growing up pictures, and, ice skating in Vienna and like flapper type parties and that kind of thing. And so, knowing that that's not actually something that I'm the only one holding on to, but kind of continuing to talk about that and cultivate that is something that I'm taking with me from this. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. We have about 10 minutes left. And, you know, I think I'm thinking about how to wrap this up. And I guess I'll pose a question that, you know, you all can think of brief answers to, since we don't have much time. But you know, thinking there's so much that's come up today about passing on ways of being, passing on legacies, maybe figuring out how to change legacies, um, how to protect our own soul, how to protect our family soul. There's just many of those themes that have come up, and if you just take a step back from today and think about you know, where this conversation and participating in this experience might take you, and hold you. I think more than take you, hold you. You know, as Peggy was speaking about, this is a really difficult time in all of our lives with COVID and many other things. So how is it going to hold you in the coming months or maybe years even?
I think it's a gift for us to end a few minutes early. I hope, Steve, you agree that I learned from my dear friend Charlie Lang, leave them wanting more, and to give from show business, and to give people who are staying on a very long time through this a little bit of a 3-minute break to get up and stretch before the next one. So unless someone else of our group has anything to add, I'd say thank you so much, Akansha, for being our interviewer and our guide through this, and to everybody here.
Well, thank you all for being here. It was incredible to hear your stories all woven together, and hearing all of the responses coming together at the same time, and just kind of getting to think of them all in layers, and expanding on each other. And I don't know, it's just been very cool to imagine also all your relationships with each other. So thank you for bringing that to us here.